Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at two important stories. The first, of course, in reference to the amendments that have been proposed in the Elections Bill 2023, which give power to the caretaker setup. And this is important, especially in terms of the kind of political and economic challenges that the country faces, and in significance to the IMF standby arrangement, under which, of course, we know that the review will also be undertaken by the caretaker setup. So it's going to be important in terms of who exactly that is going to be and what sort of powers they have. And so the way that the caretaker setups powers have been increased according to the amendments proposed is going to be important, especially in terms of the kind of fiscal obligations that Pakistan has and the way that it wants to take forward the SIFC. So we're going to be exploring the way forward in terms of the economic challenges the country faces and how exactly will the distribution between the present government, the caretaker setup, and the newly elected government is going to impact the way that the economic trajectory of Pakistan will continue, particularly in reference to the IMF bailout package, and then also the bilateral engagements and foreign direct investment that is needed in the country. That is going to be the focus of our first segment of the show today. Our next one is going to look at the very important bill that has been approved by the Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Authority Amendment Bill by the National Assembly Standing Committee on Information and Broadcasting, and a number of changes and measures have been proposed within this bill, including curtailing the spread of misinformation and fake news and increasing the powers of journalists, and also helping the freedom of press. So it's going to be important to discuss and analyze what sort of measures are going to be provided within this bill that are going to empower journalists and the journalism community within the country, and how exactly will it be able to curb the spread of disinformation or fake news, and what exactly will be the channels of communication that are going to be used in light of any sort of incident in terms of any broadcasting channel or any other aspect being used against the country or the nation, or whether or not there is going to be an authority that is going to be taking a look into what exactly it is that is going on, in a proper investigation that is required. So the powers, of course, within this bill are also important in terms of understanding how exactly will that play out when we talk about the political dynamics of the country as well. So we're going to be taking a look at that at the end of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by a senior analyst, Farooq Batafi, and a senior geopolitical analyst, Raja Faisal. We've also been joined by senior economist, Dr. Hakan Najib. Thank you, Dr. Hakan, for being part of the show. And of course, let me start with you, because we've spoken about the way that the caretaker setup's power have been increased, but especially when we take a look at the economic challenges that the country faces, and the way that we want to move forward both in terms of democratic and economic progress, it's important to see how exactly will this setup help enable and strengthen the way forward in terms of economic prosperity, and then particularly in terms of the standby arrangement. So very important tasks, of course, are there as per the responsibility of the caretaker setup. How do you see that the increase of its powers will help it undertake those?
So, Sana, I think there are two views about this. The first view is that caretakers should be restricted to only day-to-day matters. They should support the Election Commission for holding a fair election in the country. The other view, of course, is that times are different. Pakistan is in an economic challenging situation that we've probably not seen for a long time. And in that, there should be a word, I think, that has been added, and that is urgent matters, as well as signing of the ongoing matters in 4 areas. 1, multilateral and IMF. 2, triple P. 3, the privatization. And 4, the SIFC, the investment, and those areas. So I think that is what has been added in the amendment that we have done to take the process forward. I think it doesn't harm in any way. It empowers them to do the needful. The first needful, of course, is to ensure that there is adequate supply of dollars into the country. So the things that we have to do with the World Bank, IMF, AIIB, these are due in the next months, are taken care of. As far as specifically the IMF is concerned, on 30th of September, when we close the first quarter, we will be kind of um, um, finishing a quarter that will judge our review in November. The November review, you have mentioned that may be done by the caretakers. I am still not clear on that, because that will primarily depend on when the new government comes in. It
Right.
may be that the review is done by the government. Let's say if it's formed by the 20th of November,
Yeah.
then the review may be done by them. But the caretakers would have to ensure that the ongoing things that are required to be done by September and then onwards are carried on. And
Right,
similarly,
but
I think we are
doesn't that
signing
pose
something with the
perhaps
World
an
Bank as
even
well.
bigger challenge? Because if it is the caretaker setup, it is at least one setup that is looking after the current review, and not something that then will be handed over to the next government.
So, I mean, if the caretakers have to do that review, then of course, then that requires that this is ongoing, but we would be setting targets. Every time we do a review, there is a new memorandum of economic and financial policies that is signed. If that happens, that will determine the next couple of months of Pakistan's economic movement. So the caretakers would be kind of making a judgmental call on the things to be done. So that kind of empowerment would probably come in handy there. Of course, this is considered an existing and an ongoing program with the IMF that the caretakers have to take forward. But the other area I think that has necessitated this is the kind of work that we are doing under the SIFC, the Investment Council, where I think projects are in the pipeline, whether that's from Middle East or Saudi Arabia. I think things are in the things are happening. Things are also happening on the Intergovernmental Commercial Transactions Act, which has also been empowered to the caretakers to move on the ongoing work. We hear maybe it's the refinery project that would come through. So it's ongoing work, and I'm just giving an example that may need to be signed. But so these are the kind of things. But to be honest, I don't think they're going to sell the LNG plants to anyone. I don't think that's going to happen in privatization or something. But maybe some things that are in the offing can take place. So the other way to think about it is that if this is necessitated in this kind of setup, it can be taken back when we have a more smooth functioning and we can revert back to where we were initially. The other thing is that in many setups there are no caretakers. Like I'm Australian trained and we have the same parliamentary form of government there. But what does happen, Sana, there is that the election then the government goes into an election mode, whatever the incumbent government is, and their powers get restricted. So that's the other extreme of normalizing and taking things through. But so these are all the options. But I think this empowerment may help them do the stuff that is necessary to sail more comfortably, because we cannot take away this fact that Pakistan is in a precarious situation today. Even, Sana, I mean, I'll give you an example. The 21st of July number on the SBP reserves has gone down by $514 million. We had gone up to 8.7 billion. We are back to 8.2 billion. That's the kind of outflows that are happening in the country. So you want to make sure that all your bilateral arrangements, your multilateral arrangements are in place, they stay in place, and the flow keeps going. I think this is of utmost importance to Pakistan to maintain the kind of stability I think that is needed. And of course, then the IMF program, which does require a lot of monitoring, a lot of actions, a lot of measures that are ongoing in the program. Which means ongoing means every month you have to do something, you have to work on that, and then be able to meet the quantitative targets, the indicative targets, the ongoing structural benchmarks. So when we've specified in the caretaker empowerment this, I think they'll be more tilted to keeping an eye on how these things move. And I am hoping that the disbursement of the planned external financing from IFIs and bilateral creditors would then stay smooth. This would be my view.
Dr. Saab, by the looks of it, as they say that the government may change, but state remains the state. Uh, can we say that this is the very first time that we are taking things very seriously? We are giving a message to the world that Pakistan is open for the FDIs. Pakistan is open for economic improvements even during the interim period, because normally what is considered from the world side is that industries, they keep on waiting for the FDIs just because of one reason, that or there is a period of election, and the investors from the outside of the world, they keep on waiting for a government change so that they can assess the mood of the upcoming government, and that's when they can decide about Pakistan. So can we say that this is the very first time that we have taken a positive initiative, which we are giving a message to the world that here we are committed to the FDIs, we are committed to the bilateral and multilateral agreements, and we will fully ensure that Pakistan as a state guarantees you that we will always be here to welcome your investments?
So let me say this. If you've heard me before, and I know Sana and Patafi Saab have, I have always said that IMF is the only way out. And when people thought that it had gone off track, I still kept saying that there will be a change of heart and we will have this marriage work. And we took really, really tough steps, no doubt about it. We delayed them. I'm willing to say this, but we did take the steps and the tough steps, and we went into the IMF. So the debt creating instruments have fallen in your lap with that. The multilateral money, the bilateral money, the refinancing from China, the UAE money, the KSA money. So that's one side to handle the short term so that there is stability on the external front and you're not bleeding. So that's one thing. But the other thing, of course, and this I used to say when I was more in the government because IMF was easier for me to handle. The other thing was that I kept saying sell something. And I didn't say that sell something, I said sell something so that we can have, like a telecom sector, we can have the power sector. Sell PIA so that there is more competition, there are new aircraft, there is new injection of money. Now, selling can be both within the country or abroad. Abroad, of course, gets you FDI without having the investment to GDP go up. Pakistan's investment to GDP is 13.6%. Any country which has been able to grow effectively has had investment to GDPs ranging from 25 to 35. The East Asian miracle, the Chinese miracle, the Vietnam miracle, the Indian growth, all have this one aspect in common. So, setting up an investment council, I've always said, BOI should be a first rate organization, BOI should do this. And we created these organizations for this purpose, separated from the bureaucracy. Unfortunately, we were not able to see this through. Now you have created another structure which I would not say superimposes BOI, but maybe kind of makes it work, uses whatever is available. But I am really hoping gets new professional input, new professional intake, men and women who can help them. So there are two low-hanging fruits here. One is CPEC 2, which means that the industry that comes here and sets up the export industry because the infrastructure is there. Number two, the Middle Eastern monies, they are ripe with money. They want to come to you. You have what I would call a good marriage with the Middle Eastern monies. Food security is a concern both in our country and to them. They import a lot of food. So if you can do the agriculture well, you can do the corporate farming, you can have them come take up lots of land that is available to you. That is something which can work well. And these two things, and underneath the Middle Eastern money, there is also the mines and minerals potential. I've always said Pakistan, Recordec is what, $100 billion over 50 years, so that's $2 billion on just one thing, then the other reserves, gold, copper, magnesium, of course. Again, I'll give you the Australian example. They run a trade surplus year after year, and they sell to the world the best minerals, and then they've now got lithium, the with which the batteries
Right.
are made. So we need to go there,
Right.
and these are really big ticket items.
Right, absolutely. But I also want to further explore a little bit, Farokh, what we were earlier discussing in terms of continuity, because it's important, especially in terms of course, the way that the caretaker setup will move towards the newly elected government, but also in terms of just the aspect of who are going to be the team leading that, who is going to be the individual that handles these tasks, because we've seen in the past also, especially in terms of the negotiations with the IMF, the change of finance minister, for example, caused a lot of ruckus in terms of what direction was taken, and it was a completely different approach from one to the other. And now if we're talking about a caretaker setup, I want to understand not just in terms of procedures or what is expected or what the requirements are from the IMF, it's also the team and the people who are going to be looking after that, ensuring that those are met. How exactly will they be able to carry forward the same things in the same way that is needed by the IMF?
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the opportunity. Let me also say that it is always a great pleasure listening to Dr. Hakan Najib. Regarding your question, Sana, the answer is very simple. The matter of stability is addressed by the question of democracy. In democracy, usually you have a 5-year term, and then after that you have elections and a new government comes, right? That would mean that whenever there is a government, there will be a finance minister, and whosoever finance minister is, if that person abides by the international agreements, then that policy continuity will continue, right? Now, regarding this law, that amendment that took place, the important thing to remember is that there are questions regarding consistency of policy, especially given that Pakistan has committed to ensuring certain reforms. For example, the biggest reform is abolishing subsidy in power sector. What does that mean? Systematically, gradually removing subsidies and hiking the electricity prices, right? This month, there was a price hike of somewhere around 7.5 rupees per unit in electricity. Next month, it is said that Pakistan will have to jack up prices once more, and it will be 3 point something, right? A 3% increase in that again. Now the question again is that this will continue during the caretaker setup as well. Now what I have to ask is whether such a hike is a day-to-day business, or is it something equivalent to an elected government's mandate, right? If you want, according to Section 230, you want to carry out the day-to-day policies, then the problem is that you cannot meet these commitments, and you get a 3-month hiatus in policies. And amazingly, because our political governments are usually reluctant to follow through on commitments, and that's why we have been falling off of the IMF bandwagon repeatedly. The best time when to actually take serious reform measures is during a caretaker setup. So how do you do it? You empower the caretaker setup by amending Section 230. By the way, I have one important differentiation to make.
Okay.
Section 230 is mentioned all over the world, amazingly. But that is not because of what we are discussing. There is another Section 230 in America that actually regulates the conduct or protects the conduct of social media. So I just wanted to clarify that we are not talking about that Section 230. It is our election, Act 2017, which has this section, and it actually regulates, particularly this part, regulates the conduct of caretaker setup. So it is important to remember that whosoever is in government, there will be a finance minister, and that finance minister because he is found appointed actually. Remember that usually prime ministers are elected. But here is one instance of a caretaker setup when a prime minister is appointed, right? It is like a job. So that person has a very limited mandate and time frame. But because the mandate is limited and time frame is limited, usually people don't want to take any kind of serious risk for the country. Now, can you have that kind of lacuna in the governance model at this time when the country is barely making it, keeping its head above the water?
Yeah.
I think not. So that is why it is most welcome. And I think that in addition to this, as Hakan Najib Saab was mentioning, SIFC is also important because recently I've been reading a lot of literature about demographic shifts and the fact that Pakistan's population keeps on increasing, Sana, and it has been increasing so rapidly that every year there has been, during the two censuses, right? One in 2017 and now, the population has increased from 200 million to 250 million. That would mean 10 million, that is 10 crore, 1 crore per annum increase in population. When you're creating more lives, you need to feed them as well. So what do? At this moment, we know that Black Sea grain export deal has also fallen through. And because of that, all over the world, there is going to be a serious challenge of grain shortage. And then, of course, agriculture as well. Pakistan has beautiful land that is actually arable land that is meant for cultivation. So why not actually focus on that as well? Right. Any government that is caretaker, if that has power, remember usually when it comes to wheat growing or any crop, it is a 6-month window, and that would include the caretaker setup as well. They're 3 months. So do you want to actually just relinquish that time and not do any progress at all?
Sure.
So I think that it is the right decision at the right time. Unfortunately, because our minds are so warped, especially media's minds, we keep on trying to find something wrong with everything. Otherwise, I think it is a great idea.
Sure, but Farokh, help me understand one more thing, especially in terms of the responsibility that then will that exist. I understand that whoever will be the finance minister will in fact be responsible. But in terms of the different political parties involved, or in terms of what you were saying, the time period or the mandate of the caretaker setup, isn't it easy to say that there will be some sort of diffusion of responsibility, that there can be some way that the political parties or the people involved can give or hide behind an excuse based on the kind of progress that is made?
Right, and that is an amazing question, because it reminds me, I'm sure that you have seen those reports as well, that few of our friendly countries, especially from Arab world, are going to create a sovereign wealth fund for Pakistan to the tune of $8 billion, and that will start coming in soon. That reminded me of something else, Sana, and that reminded me of PTI's own promises when they were forming government in this country. They were exploring the Khazana model, where you had a similar kind of umbrella organization that takes care of all the faltering or SOEs, and those assets then either can be brought to the competitive levels or then sold offloaded, right? That is the Khazana model. So today they are objecting to the caretaker setups empowerment, despite knowing that what they could not do can be done now, and because there are going to be popular and unpopular decisions that will actually benefit any political party that comes into power. Diffusion of responsibility, yes. My humble summation is the idea of democracy is that you have to have diffusion of power in any case. So diffusion of responsibility is not a bad thing if you are doing the right thing.
Right.
For the time being, the only concern is that because we are so uncertain, because we actually believe in conspiracy theories, we are going to shoot down the best unicorn that is going to provide us the answer. That shouldn't be the case.
Absolutely. Professor, when we talk about the economic challenges, we've seen that the Prime Minister has always reiterated the Charter of Economy as something that we need to proceed forward. This is something he said as soon as he assumed office as well. And of course, with reference to the kind of economic challenges that Pakistan has faced previously as well, this is something that perhaps always comes up. Do you think, but now that when we're taking a look, at least in the next couple of months, especially till the next government has been elected, do you think that that perhaps will not be the core focus of the way that we move forward, especially in terms of the reforms or fundamental changes that are required as per the standby arrangement with the IMF? Because of course, whenever we talk about the Charter of Economy, it sort of becomes void based on the fact that there is lack of consensus. And so I want to understand whether that lack of consensus is also not going to impact what is needed by the standby arrangement.
Sana, very good question, and of course that consensus, the word consensus, we have been highlighting since last year in terms of politics as well as the economic situations of Pakistan. We were direly in need of, and of course now we can say that we are heading towards sort of improving our economic situations of Pakistan. I would just highlight one aspect, which is the Green Initiative. Earlier this month, of course, it is a very positive step forward. And if we talk about empowered interim setup, I think it has a lot to do with that as well, because earlier Dr. Hakan was mentioning Australian examples. I still remember last year in one of the seminars, I met with Dr. Hakan and I asked him a question related to rocks and crops. We always talk about exporting to others and bringing dollars home, and he
rocks and crops.
Rocks and crops.
Okay, I thought rocks and crocs.
No, rocks and crops he talked about, and he actually mentioned a very important aspect, and he said that in the modern times, of course, there is another thing which can be exported, and that is idea. When we talk about the idea, of course, we talk about the IT sector. Pakistan's IT sector has a ample opportunity to thrive in the world. Pakistan is one of the countries known for its brains, known for its IT experts, and majority of the IT companies, I'm talking of the mightiest IT companies of the world, majority of Pakistani experts, they are working within America, within Canada, England, elsewhere in the world. They are already working there. Why not giving a setup to Pakistanis in Pakistan, so that the same dollar can be, we can attract it to Pakistan. So there are lots of things we need to work on, and I must say that Green Initiative will play the pivotal role in coming future, and to me that is why I am maintaining that empowered interim setup would be a very positive sign to go forward, because if we are expecting FDIs in all of the sectors of Pakistan, then we have to have an empowered setup in Pakistan, even for the 3 months as well.
Right.
Every minute counts in today's modern times. So I believe it's a powered, empowered interim setup is an excellent initiative.
Right. Dr. Hakan, of course, it's important to get an FDI in the country, and Faisal was just referring to the IT sector. And we know that the Prime Minister has launched the Freelancers and VC Fund initiative, and it's important, especially in terms of enabling the startup ecosystem within the country. We've seen a lack of VCs previously as well, and whether or not that this fund is going to actually help us achieve that is still a question mark. And I want to understand how exactly will initiatives such as these will be impacted by the caretaker setup.
So, Sana, can I take the liberty to say this? A few months ago in Dawn, quite a few months ago, I wrote a paper and the heading was Rocks and Crops. And then I was at a think tank, and I gave a presentation, and the heading was Rocks and Crops. So I know I've always talked about IMF with you, but that actually is something that was very close to my heart. So, and it makes me really happy to learn that crops is something we want to take the yields up, and rocks is something we want to dig. And of course, this comes from my Australian training that I've said so, and I'm really happy that this is happening. On the wealth fund, I think what we are trying to do, Patafi Saab, the name in the PTI government exactly came out to be Sarmaya-e-Pakistan. I think you may remember. The idea was the same, to shift some of these assets to these funds, or the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So let's call it SWF. But here the idea is a little different. Here you can use the intergovernmental act that gives you the power to then negotiate and sell some of them abroad and make some money also. So I think slightly the idea has changed. There we were trying to just restructure, as Patafi Saab rightly said, and then send them to privatization. Here you may be able to do more. I think the idea is still in the formative stage. Let's see the bill that they present to the National Assembly, and then how these transfers take place. But these would be more assets that are either doing well or are ripe for divestment, and could be divested much quicker than what we take to privatization. Unfortunately, the privatization process that we have followed takes about more than 400 days to sell something. So the thought is that where G2G deals, for example, I think the great G2G deal would have been the LNG power plants to one of the Middle Eastern countries, without naming them, who were keen to have them. And if we had, I think we would have made good money. But again, we took it to the privatization process, and we are still struggling with it. So the idea is again to expedite. See, the whole idea here, Sana, is that there is a clogged system. There is a system which is short on competence to do these things. Now, let's kind of, like the heart surgery, bypass that artery which is clogged, and try to, make forward on the economy when it comes to the external players, the multilaterals as well as the investors. There's only one thing I think then in November that we need to start doing, and that is that there are 5.2 million Pakistani business establishments as well. We can't leave them on the side somewhere. So that's something I think I will write a paper on that next, so that also gets a bit of limelight.
Right, and Dr. Haqqan, I also want to talk a little bit about the recent exchange between the US and Pakistan, especially in terms of the way that the US is going to support the economic progress of the country. And I understand that that is something that we're trying to strengthen and has been of value to Pakistan previously as well. But given the way that there has been support, especially in terms of the IMF and what Pakistan currently faces in terms of its challenges, can there be any support in terms of FDI from the US as well?
So, Sana, let me say something here, and this does come in the more in the diplomatic sphere. But once we did everything that was due with the IMF, and we did it fairly quickly. We did the budget, we did the taxation, we got rid of the stoppages on imports, we moved on the exchange rate. I think the community abroad, whether it was the US, the IMF, the European Union, China was already there, Middle Easterns, 3 billion, flowed in. Everyone has come to recognize and support us in a time that we needed their support. So, I kind of now think that, we are in a good place. We are not in a terrible place anymore. We are in a place where we did the right things, and, the help came through. Of course, in US, we have a big diaspora, and I think that diaspora is a bit different than the diaspora which is in other countries. This is more educated, there are lots of doctors, they're influential. Again, if we can set up some opportunities besides real estate, please don't sell amnesties and real estates to them. I have said this even when people have not liked it on the table in the government, that is an unproductive thing to sell to anyone. If you want to sell them a factory, the Brownfields project, even if you sell them cheaper, that's okay. They will put in some efficiency there. So yes, US is a big trading partner. I sometimes am surprised that none of our textile mills have a agreement or a joint venture with the US. Why not? It surprises me. I think there's only one venture which is with the Chinese. So of course, but to the world again, we've proven China helped us throughout. US support was there when we went to do the IMF. GSP Plus has been enhanced for us for the coming time period. So in the good of things, that is something which gives me solace that we are in an okay place where even I take responsibility and I say this: we haven't done our bit to the extent that we should have, and I don't mean today, yesterday, in many decades. As I look back, we probably haven't, but the world has stood by us, and that's a good omen, I think, for Pakistan.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Khaqan Najib, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Farooq, anything you'd like to add before we move on?
Sana, I actually wanted to, first of all, talk about that Khazana model and sovereign fund. I think that in the end, the solution lies there, right? And we'll have to fix all those assets as well. And I think that today somebody was telling me about, steel mill in Karachi. And I was told that from day one, there were attempts to actually scuttle it and destroy it, and those people might have succeeded. But the concern right now is that whatever it might be, for past 20 years, what we have seen, past 15 years, what we have seen is that there are only two possibilities. One is insolvency, where a heap of scrap is sitting and it is doing nothing. And the second one, and you're sinking money into it. The other option is to actually offload it and get rid of it. So whosoever owns property, they might actually use it for something else, but at least that will be a momentum ahead, right? That will ensure that our monies are not thrown out wastefully. Second thing regarding America, America is a great benefactor, and I'm so wary of people in this part of the world, especially who are too eager to actually see China and America as a binary, as a competing choice, because they want to inhale the idea of a Cold War, a new Cold War, right? My humble submission is that China and America have different expertise. China, for example, when it goes to various countries, it goes for hard infrastructure development, right? Like roads and all those kind of, pulls and everything, right? When you talk about the US, its specialty lies somewhere else in the soft infrastructure, networking, connectivity, trade agreement, tariff agreements, right? With that kind of a thing in mind, I think that the US, what it is doing to us right now, is it is helping us in laying out a broader, softer infrastructure. And I think that is welcome. America is a benefactor. Okay. Let me give you one example very quickly. During the COVID days, when America was actually sending or dispatching its COVID vaccines to various countries, do you know, Pakistan was one of the highest, recipients of that contribution. I think that is a mark of true friend. So we have to welcome that as well. And what I have learned recently, right, through the green, trade agreement and the other opportunities, we are working together. And there can be FDI, but that won't be from the state or state entities. It will be from the private sector, but it will come.
All right. We're going to move on to the next segment, which looks at the NA approving the Premier Amendment Bill. And Faisal, it's important, especially as a journalist, as we move forward and talk about these issues. There is a lot that needs to be done in terms of protection of journalists, in terms of ensuring that there is a channel of complaints, in terms of ensuring, of course, that there is no mass shutting down of channels based on anything and everything. And then there is a way forward, of course. This bill has a lot of amendments that moves in that direction. First of all, your comments on that, and then I'll ask you something specific as well.
Sana, I think it's a very positive initiative to go forward. Why? I think it's nearly been more than 20 years that private media was introduced in Pakistan, news channels were introduced in Pakistan. And since then, of course, I mean, it was largely seen that yes, the channels were, having some laws and rules to follow, but in later phases, what we saw that few of the channels, they just turned out to be, propagating the propaganda of one certain political party, in which, of course, the element of misinformation and disinformation was always there, time and again. And the only thing in terms of, once they were rebutted, the only thing we got out of them channels was an apology, and there was a fine, a very minimum kind of fine in the initial times, and then later on, of course, it got improved. But now we know that it's it has been increased from 1 million to 10 million rupees fine for any of the anomalies which are being proposed or presented by the media channels, number one. And number two, I think we know time and again, almost all of the channels, we were getting news from this channel and that channel that their employees, they were not getting salaries in time, they were being mistreated. And I'm talking about the lower staffs, I'm talking about the staffs which are behind the camera, I'm talking about the staffs that are doing the lenient jobs there. Fair enough, the anchors and the analysts, they were getting paid in time, and they were getting paid very high. But at the same time, if we talk about the the genuine people who are working behind the cameras, the ones who are the main source of bringing the news to the people, they were being mistreated, they were being maltreated by all of these channels. So I always wondered, where is the authority that actually compels them to do their job, and what is their job? To facilitate their employees.
Right.
And of course, time and again we have been seeing that there were complaints against different channels. So now we have the rules, now we have a way forward to it, and I think strict it gets, better it is.
Right.
For
I also want to focus a little bit on the aspect with reference to a 3-member committee now being able to call the shutdown of a channel rather than just the chairman. And Farooq, I'd like to take your take on that as well, especially in terms of how will it help support the different channels and ensure that there is transparency.
Right. I want to actually answer your question as well, but there's a broader question at stake here as well. First of all, regarding chairman and this diffusion of power, as we were discussing in the earlier segment, I think it is always welcome to include as many people as possible in such dire decisions, because without that, it can be based on one man's whims, one woman's whims, and that can actually really be very harmful. It is scientifically, it is difficult to influence 3 people very quickly as you can influence a single person, right? So that way, perhaps it is, due diligence is a good concept, and I totally endorse it. But my concern, Sana, is not merely this bill. My concern is not merely PEMRA. My concern is electronic media industry in Pakistan. Something is really rotten here. Why is it that this country has no children's channel but has more than 50 news channels, right? Why is it that those 50 channels are usually owned by people who are actually making ghee, who own property, who actually have other pursuits, the actual money-making projects elsewhere? And why is it that they are allowed so easily to possess these licenses? When General Musharraf allowed independent media in this country, at that time there were 2 or 3 questions that were very serious. One was cross-media ownership. Should you have, should any media house have the capacity to monopolize all 3 versions or 3 aspects of media, that is print, radio and television? Then there was also this issue of monopolization of other powers as well.
Right.
And somehow General Musharraf actually excluded that concern. But today, after 20 channels, why is it that the number of news channels keep on increasing? Because people want influence.
Right.
It is the lever to influence other people. So I want to see who is responsible for this, and if we cannot hold those people accountable, then any reform that is there might be good, but it is not that great. And I still keep on hoping that there is going to be a better, more aggressive campaign to correct the wrongs.
Right. Thank you, Farouk. Thank you, Faisal, for being part of the discussion. That's all that we have from the show. See you tomorrow.